All right, it looks like all of our hosts are here. Welcome everyone to today's AMA. Super excited to kick off. Today's topic is the L1 identity service and the rollout of usernames on the LAMINA1 Hub. So if you haven't been keeping track or if this is your first time on the server in a couple of days, on Wednesday, we pushed a kind of our first major update to BetaNet since we released it to you all about a month ago. Now you can reserve essentially your OG metaverse handle on hub.lamina1.com. We've tried to make it pretty easy, and so far it looks like, over 1,200 community members as of yesterday when we checked have locked down usernames. So successful so far, and sort of simple. The sort of feature of locking down a username, it really kind of reveals a lot of really important kind of like architectural things we've been building on the back end of Lamina One, that have a lot of sort of implications and how we're building this open metaverse platform. So today we are joined by our Chief Technology Officer, Will Carter, as well as three others from the L1 core team you might not be as familiar with if you listen to our AMAs. So first up, we're with Baltasar Aroso. He's been leading the front-end development and coding of the hub. He's on the L1 engineering team and is an absolute force to be reckoned with. We have Gordon Mattey, who is our Chief Product Officer at Lamina1. He's actually been with us since the very, very beginning. He kind of like helped launch Lamina1 as a company, and has recently kind of joined us really to joined us again to keep really pushing hard on the product and move these amazing releases in BetaNet for you. And then finally, we're also joined by Alaina Bryan, who's our UX lead and mastermind behind the design of many of the features and things that you've been experimenting with over the last couple of weeks on the hub. So welcome, Alaina, Gordon, Baltasar, Will. Super excited to kick off with you guys. And today, we're going to be answering questions about the design of the new identity system, how to use it, and in general, what does this mean for your future identity in the emerging open metaverse? And what does this mean for testing and moving forward on Lamina1 as we continue building together? So, I don't know, do you guys want to just like give a quick hello before we dive into community questions? We got a ton this week. I think we got over 600 as of this morning.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. This is Gordon. It's great to meet everyone. I've been here for 3 months in the Chief Product Officer role. 3 months today, actually. So I'm excited to get this released out and lots more good stuff coming.
Yeah, and hi, this is I've talked to some of you, and I want to say thank you so much to everyone here who's ever filled out a survey. That's really the bread and butter behind a lot of the features that we've implemented. So thank you so much, and super happy to be here.
Hello everyone, I'm Baltasar. I've been working at LAMINA1 engineering team to make the hub happen. Hopefully you guys have been having a good user experience. Any feedback, I'll make sure we take it and fix it as soon as possible, and enjoy.
Awesome. Yeah, every time anyone reports a bug, just imagine me DMing Baltasar frantically for you, because that's kind of our life right now. Anyway, let's dive in. You all know Will very well. Will, I won't make you introduce yourself again. You're here with us every week, but we're super happy to have you with us too.
And we're in a new place, stages. This is fun.
I know, right? All right, so let's begin. Again, we got a ton of questions and we got a bunch of really good ones. It shows, I think, that our community is thinking a lot about identity and also just really actively testing this new feature. So first up, just to kind of frame what we're doing and where we're at, Avid X Design, Alex Lav 2153, and SemiVos 0053 ask, okay, what is the Lamina1 identity service in particular? What makes it stand out from other identity tools or services out there? And what are the sort of key advantages? Or in general, what is it and why did we build this?
Should I take it, guys? Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one. So let's start with like what it is and why we started with identity, I guess, which is, when you think about the metaverse, and maybe you can think of the internet as like an abstract kind of pre-metaverse type of environment. I think like one of the most valuable, and maybe not just in monetary sense, but you'd probably see it reflected in the value of online platforms as well. I think one of the most valuable aspects of a metaverse is going to be the social component of it, which is um, how do we interact with each other, with products, with brands, with experiences? And, one of the necessary primitives, I think, to having a rich social interaction is establishing an identity, which, can be very shallow and just in terms of having a handle, but then it can get a lot deeper. Um, to include, when we think about the metaverse as Neil envisioned it, maybe there's visual aspects to your identity. How do you express yourself visually in the form of avatars or, in real life, we have accessories, we have clothing, we have, the cars we drive, how we decorate our houses. There's a huge visual component of it. And then when you go deeper and deeper, it's, there are the experiences that we bring from our, various stops within the metaverse. So can I leverage the activities that I did, if we go back to like the internet example, can I leverage the activities and the ways that I interacted, say, with Reddit? And can I take some of the social capital that, I've gained from within Reddit, and can I take it to another platform and leverage it there in a way that's valuable to me as a user, but then maybe also valuable to other users in that platform and maybe to the platform itself? So I think like what this is coming down to is, we want to build sort of a composable identity that you can take with you across experiences throughout the metaverse that you can leverage as an individual, that other experiences or applications can leverage in a way that, respects you. Um, and so I think when we talk about key advantages, this is all stuff that is generally already done in kind of closed wall gardens. So, when you look at Facebook, this is all data that, is tracked, the so-called social graphs, how you interact with the platform, how you interact with others. The difference is, it's not open, it's not self-sovereign, it's not transparent. So, and even if it was transparent, there's very little chance that you'd be able to control how that data is used, accessed. And so what we're trying to build is sort of something very similar, which is something that can grow with you while you're in the metaverse and whatever form that takes place, but more specifically, something that you have control over, both in terms of how it's leveraged, but also in terms of its visibility. Um, so making sure we're respecting privacy, stuff like that. So there's like the simple answer of identity, which is like, cool, what's my username? What's my handle? What's my avatar? But then like much deeper than that, we want to start building out like really rich composable identity primitives that you can take around with you.
Awesome. And Alan Byrne-Pump asks, what features does the Lamina1 identity service currently offer to users? So obviously, Will, you're talking about a very sort of long-term vision that we're just now beginning to build the sort of groundwork for. But for now, what is it exactly that users can do with the L1 identity service?
Yeah, so on day one, it's very simple at the moment. So we're going to be tackling this in iterations, and as I said, the table stakes here are generally like, how do I want to be referenced? What's my social handle? Um, and that's what we're currently offering today is a way for you to establish, a social handle or nickname within the metaverse. And there are some things that come included with that, which is like, can I, in the context of Web3 on chain, you're kind of usually identified by a blockchain address. But what we're doing here is mapping kind of more human, social recognizable, identifiers to that address, and maybe to multiple addresses. So what's available today is what we call the L1 naming service. It's based off the Ethereum naming service, for those of you who are familiar with that. And it's a way for you to map a pseudonym to a blockchain address. And then again, I think just built into that, which is already available but isn't being exposed right now, there's going to be the ability to attach avatars and some other data to that name, that pseudonym.
Ryan Blog asks, why is it important to the LAMINA1 universe to establish a username alongside, some of the more traditional methods of identification a lot of Web3 users are used to, such as, a unique address? And I think, Alaina, you were going to take this one.
Yeah, I can speak to this one a little bit. So today, when you set your unique username, it's just a way to kind of identify who is sending transactions and be identified in the transactions that you sent. But in the future, these usernames are going to be able to support a lot more L1 account and like general metaverse functionalities, such as social messaging, viewing profiles, or even being identified in metaverse spaces. But we understand also that there is a desire for people to have anonymity in certain situations. So, and so that I think is where some of the concern is like, well, where's my hash? Where's my nice anonymous, hexadecimal hash, right? But we will definitely work in the future to also support that anonymity. And I think there's some later questions to speak to that a little bit more. But overall, like right now, even though usernames are just kind of providing an alternative to that hexadecimal hash or the alphanumeric address that you as a Web3 expert may be used to seeing, having the real identifiable username will open the door to a lot more metaverse functionality in the future.
Awesome. We also got quite a few questions from Mun666, Kuchina's Sagabot, and I think also like Ed Keys was asking this several weeks back, but like, so we've got the L1 identity service, we've got the L1 name service that kind of locks down your username, but we also, as part of the system, launched an identity subnet within the system, which is our first kind of subnet that we've had go live on BetaNet. So they're asking, what is the function of the L1 identity subnet within the system? And what is the L1 identity subnet in general? Like, what is that layer all about? I feel like Baltasar should answer
Do
this
you
one.
want? Yeah, I can. Yeah. So like, y'all been like, whenever you interact with the hub and LAMINA1 and BetaNet here, you can send some tokens around, and you're using BetaNet here, right? So L1 identity subnet is a subnet on the side that basically we have a bunch of smart contracts that allow you to set up like an identity on chain that then is like linked to your address. So you can indeed like transact and kind of communicate on the blockchain in a way using this identity service, right? So this is quite important for multiple reasons. Like ENS has been around for a while. The fact that you have an address like that you need to memorize or copy and paste here and there and like make sure it's the correct address, because there's a couple attacks nowadays to bypass this. So they try to mine the last 4 digits and the first 4 digits of the address. So you kind of, when you truncate the address in some platforms, you think that's the correct one and it's not. So that's like something the proof of work nowadays people are trying to do, like to bypass you. And that's one of the reasons why identity is so nice to have. So you don't need to have this bunch of characters in a big string that to pass around to just transact on chain. So you can use the identity for that. So basically, it's a subnet on the side that allows you to have this functionality while interacting with smart contracts, right? So that's on the side of the beta net. That's what like L1 identity net is as a system right now.
Yeah, and if I could add to that a little bit as well, like the service is up and running and it will evolve over time, and there's some really interesting kind of technical architecture possibilities based on the kind of the Avalanche platform that we're using that enables you to create kind of an identity service that's probably not like any identity services that you've seen out there today. We can actually run multiple kind of virtual machines and blockchains within the same blockchain. And so we have this really expansive medium to deliver a kind of really comprehensive set of services around identity. But ultimately, it comes from the user experiences that people are building and the spaces that use these identities. And so, what we're working on now is a set of SDKs that can be integrated into applications that are very modular, that enable an application developer that's building a space to very easily integrate these identities into their experiences, so that the identity can be maintained kind of across all of the experiences, and the histories retained, et cetera, and you have controls over how you express that identity, or use particular profiles in different spaces, just like in the real world. Like, we have different profiles when we're like at home versus, which is one space, versus when we're going shopping, versus if we go to a concert. And so we think about like how these identities can be adaptable between spaces, and like the level of information that might be required to share between spaces, and giving users complete control over that. But yeah, really for application devs, we want to make it really super simple to integrate the identity service into experiences to take advantage of all these services. And we'll be talking about that more soon. It's a big focus for us in the coming months to make that work, and also critically kind of preserve the user's very sensitive information and their private keys in applications, which is something that we think about a lot. We want users to be able to interact with things without exposing their most sensitive information that can get access to their account to the developer or to any other app user within a space. So yeah.
Yeah, that actually. Oh wait, Will, I think you've been trying to get a word in for a little bit now.
Well, yeah, it's just so Ed Keys asked a really good question, or he wants a little bit of clarification, which is like, why a subnet? So why didn't we just launch this on the quote unquote beta net? And I just wanted to address that the identity subnet is, it is a part of beta net. So when Baltasar was saying beta net, I think he was referring to the C chain, which is the general EVM environment we're all kind of developing against currently, and it's what everyone's been interacting with. But that architecture that Gordon just mentioned, the Avalanche architecture, allows us to spin up dedicated subnetworks that have their own properties. And the identity one is a particularly important example of why subnets are powerful, in that, in our mind, identity is sort of like one of those public goods that should be accessible for everyone, that shouldn't cost a lot of money to use. And so, the Web3 environment, the blockchain environment in which identity is built and is used, probably has or should have a different economic structure, a different governance structure than, for example, a subnetwork that's running, a monetized game, for example. And so that's why it's in its own separate subnet, is it gives us, more fine-grained control over the economics around how you interact with your identity on a blockchain, and then also the governance of that network. So that's why it's in a separate subnet.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And yeah, I mean, to anyone who's got like a follow-up question or wants to be asking questions live, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll either get to them live if they're pertinent to what we're answering, or at the end. So thanks so much, Ed. Next up, actually, as Gordon was kind of talking about, the need for sort of security, and the fact that, we're always thinking about, how do we secure people's identity? We did get a lot of questions from community members such as Moker 4660, Suffolk 54, Terramore, who ask, how do you reconcile this kind of balance between permissionless and decentralization with sets of rules regarding identity? Or as user Terramore sort of more sharply put it, I don't particularly appreciate with this new wave of identity services in the crypto space. How will you balance the need for identity with one of privacy and protection of user data, right? Like creating this identity service, like where is this information going, and like how do we keep it safe for people?
Another great question. I think, a big portion of our engineering team was working on a privacy focused network prior to this. So I think we're all in agreement and sensitive to this concern, which is like, it's one thing for Facebook to have all my data. It's another thing to have my data just, kind of displayed for the entire world to see on a blockchain. And so I think there is kind of always a need for the end user to be able to control what data is visible, how it's used. I think Web3 is particularly good at enabling that. And that's why you're seeing a lot of people move towards generating Web3 identity solutions. It's because you, for the first time, have the keys and you can kind of expose that data as you want with some of the cool technology like zero knowledge proofs and verifiable credentials. So I think in my mind, a real identity solution needs to have some of those tight-grained controls um, over how that data is exposed, how it's used, and all of those controls are in the hands of the end user, again, to protect your identity. So we're in agreement. This is a huge concern for us as well. Trying to think what were the other side of that question.
I think it's mostly just about the balance. I mean, and it's a tricky balance. It's kind of an existential question of blockchain in general. But
yeah, I think like there's the question of like, should anyone truly be anonymous within a metaverse philosophically? And then I think, it should come down to, you can be anonymous in my mind. Well, there's a question of whether anyone can technically be anonymous on the internet in general, but let's say like strongly pseudonymous. I think there's going to be spaces like there are spaces in real life where it's going to be important for the people in those spaces to be able to establish rules, say for against bullying, or maybe there's legal considerations. There's going to be experiences or spaces that require visitors to that space to prove certain aspects of themselves. I do think that's important. That doesn't mean you have to go to that space if you don't want to participate in that type of identification. But I do believe there are going to be spaces that will either benefit greatly from that or maybe even require it. So I do think you'll need the capability to establish these identities. But I don't think you should be required to either, or you shouldn't have to do deep identification of who you are. So like KYC type stuff.
Yeah, and it's also possible that in any given space, I think that you might say that I actually want to share more information about who I am with people that I know, that I've already connected with in the past, versus people that I've never met before. And being able to have that flexibility in space is really useful and is enabled through composable identities, essentially, and the way that we're trying to structure things. But we're certainly, we're very interested in getting more requirements from people building spaces around how they think about this and what they need. This is largely an unexplored, very broad canvas that we're trying to, work out where to paint. So yeah, very, very interested in talking to anyone building spaces that are looking for different ways of helping people collaborate, essentially, in those spaces.
Before we dive in, I've got a bunch of questions about specifics of the name service, but I think ending our sort of big picture discussion with a question from Alchemist19 is awesome. And Alchemist19 asks, and I feel like we've been getting at this for the last couple of questions, which is, are the identities that we're currently securing on Lamina1 in reality only pseudonymous and not truly anonymous by design?
I would say that, like as Will was saying as well, anonymity and pseudonymity is kind of a tricky separate of concepts, because Bitcoin was built with around, a lot of people were usually call it anonymous, right? End of the day, what happens is you can track down the transaction because it's always recorded on blockchain as well, and you're hiding yourself behind a bunch of characters that's definitely attached to yourself in a way. But yeah, you're pseudonymous and not anonymous. End of the day, technically speaking, and here an identity does the same basically. Nothing really changed. So you're just mapping. You're basically linking your current address to another string, another bunch of words that as you wish. So nothing really changed. Consider like a regular blockchain that has the addresses there, like blockchain, like Bitcoin. So I would say that you're still pseudonymous, and there's no true anonymity by design, except you're talking about chains that like Monero or Zcash, when you're actually going deep down in the stack on the consensus protocol as well, where all the transactions are anonymous in a way. But yeah, those in terms of regulation are not also something to explore.
Thanks, Baltasar. So now I'm going to dive into just some specifics about the identity service itself, and like sort of more questions around what's possible, why are things the way they are. So David OX, Aomi 1991, Taranazov, and a bunch of other people are asking, why the additional numbers after the username? What is the purpose of the random 4-number hash at the end of every username? So if you've secured a username, you'll probably find when you lock it down, you kind of type in the name that you want, and there's like a little number that appears at the end of it that you can change and adjust until you're happy with it. But like, what is the point of that, and why is it necessary?
The main reason could be bots, could be front running, could be like there's a lot of reasons behind that decision in terms of design, and basically those random 4 numbers there come from a proof of work that's done on the client side, which avoids like first front running and also bots. So that's like kind of a security measure in a way. So that's the main purpose of having a random 4-numbered hash, because you're currently not paying for the username. So if it's a free username, you kind of need to have this small restriction that avoids like a bunch of robots or whatever you want to call it to set up the identity and kind of reduce the good usability of the network.
And for folks who don't know what front running is, can you just give a brief kind of like overview of like the challenge that we're trying to solve for?
Yeah, sure. So front running is like basically in the context of blockchain refers to the act where like a malicious entity observes a transaction broadcasted to the network, and they quickly submit their own transaction with a higher gas price to have it mined before the original transaction. So for example, in the context of ENS, this could mean spinning like domain names that others are trying to register. Here is spinning like kind of trying to get the ownership of a username that someone else is trying to register. So there's multiple ways of preventing or mitigating front running. Some of them are, for example, the proof of work we do on the client side, which gives randomization like in the transaction as well, and make sure that there's some work to be done on the client side that prevents a large scale attack, let's say, right? So that's to put it like in simple terms.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Baltasar. Got another question from Snegkov and Alajnad W, who ask, will multiple usernames be possible? Will it be possible and also will it be possible to be able to, use or switch between multiple usernames across different metaverse experiences?
I can kick this one off, and then if anyone else has any thoughts. We definitely are looking to support multiple usernames. We understand that you may want to have a professional persona that you're taking into certain spaces, whereas other spaces you may want to, be manifesting as something a little more casual or a little different. There's a lot of different personas that people adopt just in day-to-day life. So we definitely want to adopt or support the functionality of multiple usernames and being able to switch from username to username and persona to persona as the situation calls for it. So that is very much on our minds and in our future roadmap.
Awesome. The idea though right now is that you can kind of as it stands, you can only have like one username active on the hub at a time, right? But whenever you change your username, aren't you technically like reserving a new one?
Yes, that's right. Right now, when you add a new username, it becomes the active username, but all of your other usernames are still linked to your account. So the current functionality is that you can only have the one, but soon we will introduce the functionality for you to be able to switch between various usernames that are associated with your account.
Awesome. I feel like that's kind of like interesting and fun because if you're looking to lock down multiple usernames, while it's not necessarily like the easiest thing to see on the front end of the hub, you can technically be doing that as well by hitting change username. Speaking of which, Chop0015 and Alex ask, will it be possible to change my username in the future? And will changing your username be free or will it cost tokens? Baltasar, you claimed this one.
Yeah, so currently it is possible to change your username in a way. The problem here is that there's always a transaction cost, right? You're interacting with the chain. So you're writing to this blockchain, which is basically a decentralized database, right? So when you do that, you need to pay for those, like for that cost. And currently, the faucet is covering for the users at this point. In the future, I know we might not cover these costs, but I'm unaware of that exact timeline, and that comes in also the different approach we'll have with the usernames. But yeah, as of right now, you can change your username. But as Alaina and was saying as well before, you always have one username linked to your address, even though you set up multiple after. Just the last one will be linked in reverse to your address.
Awesome. Pretzel0719 asks, will usernames be censored or limited by Lamina1 in any way? For example, if someone wanted to go ahead and put some explicit words in their username or something that might not be appropriate, or might get, flagged or banned by a traditional Web 2 service, are we planning anything like that?
Yeah, the way that we think about it is that the ability to name yourself is kind of like a fundamental right that you have. In fact, I think that those rights are even talked about at the United Nations. Like your name is such an important part of your identity in the real world, and we think that that's really, really important that you can have any name that you want. But what we're building is something that can be used in many different spaces, right? These portable, interoperable identities can move between spaces, and we recognize that the space itself might want to have some controls over usernames that can be used in their space. So, for example, not allowing rude words to be in the username because they just don't want that in their space. And so, by having these kind of composable identities, we're able to potentially provide spaces the ability to control policies around profiles and usernames within spaces. So they could set a policy that says we don't allow offensive words in usernames, and that will enable the user to then make a decision about whether or not they don't want to enter the space because of that restriction, or do they want to pick up a new username? Do they want to use one that they already have that's not offensive? And so it gives control to the space in terms of how, in terms of those policies, and it also gives control to the user in terms of giving them the ability to decide how they might want to interact with the space. And we think that's a win-win for everyone.
Totally. I feel like I asked this question a lot of times myself and had to constantly remind myself, this is the open metaverse we're talking about, right? And then number two, I think like in the documentation, you'll see in user guidelines and recommendations, we basically say like, yeah, you can set your username for whatever you want it to be, but like if you're selecting a username that might have an obscenity in it or a slur or something, like you could really be limiting your ability to access future spaces in the metaverse. So, you can do what you want, but just know that like, that'll be kind of up to the spaces and the creators and the developers who are setting these experiences up, right? So we're not necessarily in the business of moderation or limiting people's self-expression, but that'll be done by experience. And I think it really makes sense to me where it's like, if you have a children's metaverse experience versus like an adults only metaverse experience, like you might be able to use two different usernames and like that's totally fine, right? Like that's kind of an ideal state of identity and that kind of flexibility. Anyway, I'm going to keep diving through questions. So Paul DFG and Dexty ask, in terms of like what the rules are for setting a current username currently, there's like a lot of need for self-expression, right? Like people are asking, can I use different fonts? Can I use emojis in my username? What about different languages like Chinese or Korean? Like, what's the kind of limit for characters and stuff like that? Like, how are we building the kind of uh, parameters and requirements for a username in the system?
I can talk about that one.
Go for it.
Go for it.
Go for it, Paul.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Oh
We
no,
lost
no.
I can answer while he's getting reconnected. So yeah, I think like in general, most Unicode characters can be represented within your username. So that includes a lot of emojis, though you'll have to take into consideration that emojis take up more quote unquote like character spaces because they're represented by multiple hexadecimals. So like you might end up with a potentially shorter username if you end up using emojis. But you can use most emojis. You can use various languages. I have a Korean username. If anyone wants to send me some coins, there it is. But yeah, like anything that you can do in ENS and most of the DNS rules will be applicable here. And I think we have the exact rules for what's available or what you can do directly within the docs. So we can check those out.
Awesome. Yeah, Focal Killin, you're asking the important questions in the chat right now. I think the username you're suggesting would technically be possible though, right? I don't know, Will, if you want to check the chat.
I'm actually not sure because of the special characters that are in there. But the meaning itself is not a blocker for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, Ed Keys brings up a super important point, which is some of these usernames can be used in a way that could actually sort of be abused, and that's one thing we're trying to look at addressing. So, like for example, one of our engineers pointed out, Like, what if I establish a username that looks like a smart contract address? So, I set my username to, Elena's smart contract, or her wallet address, I'm sorry. And then I start giving it to people so that they think they're sending money to Elena's wallet, but instead it's actually an ENS redirect to my own wallet. So like there's real considerations there about, how do we make sure that people aren't kind of abusing these usernames. So that's something we have in the back of our mind, and we're looking at ways to address, Ed. But it's a really good point.
Just like following up on that. So the way the L1 domain service like works, that will always be covered on the backend, let's say. So that will, what Will is saying, I believe, is more towards the client side, because that is never allowed, let's say, to have an identity that's the full address, because you always have the domain after, in this case, like that one. And on the front end, we kind of hide that fact to have a better user experience. But then it's kind of a trade-off, right? We want to make it simple and clean, but at the same time, we want to give the user all the possibilities. But we need to set some rules in a way so like they don't exploit those possibilities in a bad way, right? So I think, but we're always covered by the backend rules for sure to avoid these situations to happen that can be malicious. And sorry for dropping out before. I think it was the internet connection.
No, it's good. You came back at perfect timing. So next question I have from Ivana6923, Fedcast, and Sepulka. We've actually got a lot of these questions, which is, will it be possible to resell usernames created in Lamina1? For example, will a domain market be organized, or will we be giving people the ability to sell usernames from one user to another? And Gordon, you claimed this one in our sort of prep call, so I'll let you take this.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think fundamentally, the username is an asset, and on chain it's represented as an NFT, the non-fungible token. So, those are transferable between people. So if people want to choose to pay other people for their username, then they should be able. They can do that. Lamina1 itself is not in the business of creating kind of asset marketplaces. We're in the business of providing services and tooling that enable anyone to create those marketplaces. So in the future, what you'll see from us are kind of protocols that support marketplace listing and payment processing that other people can take advantage of to launch asset marketplaces for any type of asset, whether that's a username, a metaverse object, an avatar, or whatever it might be. And so, we expect that if there is perceived value there, then we should see that market emerge. We'd love to talk to anyone that's interested in building out those marketplaces. And we really want, marketplaces are critically important to bring people together for commerce. And so we'd love to understand kind of what you might be wanting to do there. But fundamentally, like, it's your asset. You can do whatever you want with it, and if you want to find someone to sell it to, then great. And I think that we think a lot about kind of, and I think there's maybe some questions further on that perhaps address or ask this question. A subsequent feature around usernames is the idea of a premium username, where you can get any username that you want that doesn't have the 4 digits appended to it. And the approach of existing kind of username services is to model essentially kind of like the scarcity of those usernames and charge different prices for 1-character usernames versus 2-character usernames versus 5-character usernames. And we think that this is a pretty challenging model to roll out, because it really restricts people in terms of getting the username that they might want, and it kind of imposes some very strict economic constraints around that, based on arbitrarily the length of the domain. But the length of the name doesn't really mean anything. It's more important to have something that that you can express yourself with. So we're thinking a lot about kind of premium usernames, and we expect that after we launch it, we'll iterate on it, particularly around how these usernames are initially priced, because we want to provide something that's fair, and we want to provide something that enables people to get what they want, and also really considers kind of what is the meaning behind a scarce username. You know, like having a username A might be good, but in other systems on other chains, that's very expensive compared to the username Alan, and so but you're not as identifiable as A necessarily. So really, the goal is to get people the username they want, and if somebody else wants to buy it, enabling that trade to happen.
Awesome. Got a couple of more questions left at the end. We'll keep this going until about 15 minutes after the hour. But Timurium and Vampo G ask, and I think that this is a huge question that a lot of people are asking, which is, how long do we get to keep these usernames? Or will BetaNet users be able to carry forward their usernames to MetaNet, or get early access to reserve them in the future? What's our plan for that?
I can take a stab at this one, probably more from the user experience point of view versus the technical aspects. There are certainly technical considerations here as well. We established the beta net to provide a persistent environment as we roll out these new features. And our desired goal is for those things to roll into the mainnet as much as they can. The practical reality, though, is that it's possible we launch things that cannot be migrated for technical reasons, and so it's really hard for us to make this commitment right now, unfortunately. And I'm kind of sorry for that, because you guys are putting a lot of effort in supporting testing the system. It would be nice to persist the names to the mainnet, but it really still is an open question for us in terms of supporting the migration of those names, particularly if we make changes to kind of like the underlying data structures and things like that. So I guess stay tuned, and we want to do the right thing, but at the same time there are technical constraints as well.
Awesome. We've got a bunch of questions. I'm going to jump sort of more into like the future of the L1 name service, and sort of where we're headed in terms of its development and what we've been thinking about. So just as like a quick overview, Cudham8436, Ina1462, and Allegis ask, so all right, we can set usernames now, right? But what are the future ID functionalities we're planning for the hub in the future? Alaina, do you want to kick this one off?
Sure. Yeah, so we just launched the LAMINA1 identity service, and the only thing in the identity service right now is the name service, is those usernames that you guys have been setting. But the identity service, we definitely understand that metaverse identity, and based on all of the research, all of the surveys that you guys have done, metaverse identity is a complex thing that is not just a username, it's not just a verbal name or something. It also includes your physical manifestation in the metaverse, such as your avatar or your PFP, which may or may not be an NFT. It includes the items that are associated with you, your clothing NFTs that might go on your avatars, your skins, your weapons. So there's a lot of more things to identity than just this name service. And so that's what we're really going to be expanding going forward, is avatar support. And along with that, item support, items specifically that will correlate to your avatar, the ability to take those items with you, with your avatar and persona, take them into various spaces so that your identity can be something that really travels with you wherever you go. And then also what we discussed earlier of kind of having flexibility and customizability in your identity or identities in terms of both the names you're going by, the avatar, what you look like on depending on which persona, and also the permissions that might be associated with those identities. So there's a lot of room for growth, and we're really, really excited to expand the functionality of the LAMINA1 identity service.
We've also got a bunch of questions, and I'm going to try to combine them in the interest of time. But Jackal Girl is asking, we've got like a lot of really interesting questions around like the growth and what we're considering for sort of like user settings and stuff with regards to these identities. So Jackal Girl asks, will LAMINA1 be able to incorporate a function where something cannot be sent to, i.e. assigned the ownership of a username or address, without the addressee's explicit consent, right? Or kind of a similar question from Vizan Tok KB, which is kind of asking a kind of different functionality but related, which is like, will it be possible to hide your username from unwanted persons within the metaverse? So in general, like, how are we, like, are we planning anything for like, you know, people being able to set like who they can communicate with, who they can appear to, who they can receive items for? Is that something that we're considering in future build outs?
Yeah, I think it's something that I talked about a little bit earlier. Like, we do want you to be able to have control over who sees your username in the spaces that you're in, and we think a lot about kind of like the you know, your connections essentially, right? That's associated with your identity, and how do you control who sees what where? And so, like, if you know, if you have friends that you've connected with in a certain space, maybe you only want those friends to see your username after you've kind of made that social graph connection to them. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be worked out there, and we think it's really interesting and fertile ground for experimentation. Yeah, so I think we think that we need to see more spaces, like particularly spaces that are very collaborative and social, to really understand kind of what's happening in those spaces and how to best approach this. And I think also taking Jackagill's question, as it relates to incorporating a function to control or provide consent for people sending you assets. Thanks for asking this question. Actually, I think you've posed it a few times, and it's something that we think about a lot. Actually, Alaina's been really noodling on this, because we do think that there is some real value in terms of providing control again to the user, and you know, if somebody sends me something, then you know, maybe it's in quarantine before I do something with it, and decide what to do with it, especially if they're not one of my connections or someone I've never interacted with in a space, or don't have any history of them in spaces. And so I think that kind of, that it's very similar to an email client, right? Where you have an inbox and you have a spam box, and you know, email is also something that's subject to this dynamic of receiving unwanted content. And so, yeah, we think about how users can have control over that, and we really like this idea. So really appreciate you asking about it again. Certainly something that we're thinking about, and we think that actually some of the first spaces that we launch might integrate something like this.
Amazing. And VZ, who is on fire in the AMA chat today, asks, you know, any plans to associate usernames with a sort of like on-chain credibility system, similar to like a credit score to distinguish users from malicious actors on-chain? That sounds both like a really great utility and also like a terrifying dystopia in my personal mind. But
A Black Mirror episode about it. But no, I think like what I was saying in the first question, I think it was, I do think social capital is and like finding ways to map kind of your social connections and your social activities to some type of, you know, credibility to that, you know, can be used by others, whether they're individuals who may want to get a sense for, you know, are you a real person? You know, who do you know? Do we know the same people? But also, you know, I think this is this is definitely something we definitely we want to implement for sure. I think it's really challenging to do this in a way that's private, and that's one of the things that obviously we care deeply about. So that's one consideration is, yes, we want to provide some way for you to take this data about who you know and your activity and leverage it, but we also want to do it in a private way. So that's one challenge that we need to overcome there. But I think this is extremely important because I think the only way that we can currently get a sense for who's real and who's not in Web3 today has traditionally been sort of a strong KYC process, or if you're, I think it was WorldCoin, to like get an orb sent to you in the mail and map your face out. So I think this is a really good kind of alternative to that approach, which is like kind of more organic in nature. So yeah, it's something we're thinking about. It's part of that kind of composable identity that we want to establish. But it is challenging technically to do it in a way that's like safe for you as a user.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 3 words KYC process, which I think I'll end on like as sort of our last question. But we got a ton of questions in this week from username frame Alibaba, Andre asking, are we planning a KYC process or anything like that? It sounds like, there's an alternate way to be doing this other than like having people upload their IDs to Lamina1, right?
Well, Gordon was telling me about a project I guess we've spoken with recently that kind of allows you to KYC yourself, which I think is kind of an ingenious way of approaching this problem. There's a lot of concerns with KYC. Like there's going to be specific experiences, like I said earlier, that might have legal requirements to know specific things about you that are kind of provable, um, rather than something that's more or less kind of statistically correct based on like a social score. So like, are you a US citizen, for example? And that's like, we certainly do not want to be in a position where we're KYCing our users. But I do think it's a, Gordon, you want to talk about, I think it was out DID, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think KYC, when people use the term, it comes from the financial services industry primarily, and being able to have verifiable recorded proof that um, you know who your customer is. They are who they say they are. They live where they say they live. They have a certain digital document ID, also a document ID that's associated with that. And I call kind of all of those things regulated KYC, right? There's a high bar and a high level of requirement for every company that asks for KYC in that scope has to store those documents on a server somewhere. You have to give them a copy of your passport or your driver's license or whatever it might be. When we think about kind of the scope of potential experiences that can be unlocked through KYC, there's a huge swath that are covered by, if we've regulated on one side of the spectrum, we have unregulated KYC on the other side of the spectrum. So these are instances where you might want to know something about your customer, but you don't need to store those documents on a server. So an example might be buying tickets to a music show, to a concert. In that situation, the artist wants to ensure that real people are getting access to tickets and not brokers and traders and dealers who are then going to buy those tickets and resell them at a higher price immediately afterwards in another marketplace. And so, like there's a huge challenge around Sybil attacks, and those services get botted all the time in terms of buying tickets. If you could do a very simple thing by identifying yourself, with a government document that identifies you uniquely, and essentially unlocks access to a true fan, right? Someone that is real, that wants to buy that ticket, then it removes all of those attack vectors in terms of botting ticket sales. And there are some really interesting technologies, just like Will mentioned. There's this team called Out DID. They've built client-side only zero-knowledge proof technology where you can take a photo of your document on your phone. It generates a proof on the client side and sends that proof to the server for verification. And that means the document never leaves your device. All that leaves your device is a zero-knowledge proof, which cannot be reversed and cannot be it cannot extract the information from the document, but you can prove your name, you can prove your address, you can prove your that you have a photo, et cetera, et cetera. And so we think unregulated KYC is really interesting, and certainly something that we want to enable. Kind of works in concert with our principles behind identity, which is not disclosing things to other people that don't need to be disclosed. And obviously, zero knowledge proofs are a very fertile ground for experimentation around this, and they're getting faster and better all of the time. And so it's actually pretty expensive to do this client side. Like if you wanted to support every single ID in the world, like you have to generate thousands of ZK circuits that are customized to every single possible ID document that's issued. I mean, it could be a passport, it could be a driver's license, it could be a library card. I don't know, it could be anything really. And so that's challenging because there's a lot of data there. So, but there's a lot of attention in the space. A lot of teams doing research, and just like what we're seeing in the AI space with this rapid acceleration of people taking advantage of open source publications of models for generative AI, we're also seeing that in the ZK space, and so we're seeing a rapid progress there. So yeah, so we're certainly not going to mandate KYC the use of LAMINA1 as a network, but spaces may require it, or marketplaces may require it, and we want to enable that.
Thanks so much for your answers. I mean, everyone. So we're at 12:16, so we're a minute over. I think we're going to end that. I think we can definitely do this. Do another one of these in the future once we roll out some more identity service features and stuff like that. But thanks so much for joining us. I've said this a couple of times in the chat today, but there's actually no secret code for attending the AMA this week. We had one for submitting a question, but I'm trying to make it so that we don't just only incentivize live attendance of AMAs to be more fair to our followers who are not on, Pacific US time. So no secret code today, but thank you all for listening. Again, if you submitted a question, you should have already redeemed your XP for this one, but we'll be kind of going back and forth on whether or not we're incentivizing AMAs just in general, sort of on a case-by-case basis. In other updates, just as like a kind of community wrap-up for everyone, we have now 37 community partner validators officially up and running on the BetaNet as of this week. So next week, actually, we're going to be focusing on supporting them with delegation. So if you're not super familiar with how do I earn tokens by supporting the decentralization of a network and helping out our validators, I'm going to be writing up a big guide for the community on how to support our validators and kind of unlocking sort of more of the back end of how LAMINA1 BetaNet is operating. And it's also a great way to sort of earn tokens in the lead up to, future token drops and faucet drips. So stay tuned for that next week. On that note, the BetaNet airdrop is still delayed as we parse through the data and tokenomics of everything. We gave community members until end of day yesterday to make sure that their Discord handles that they're super actively engaging on here are linked to their Zeely awards, are linked to their Zeely accounts, right? So this is to maximize rewards. So we found out that there were kind of several users who they were using a different Discord handle for Zeely than they were to chat, right? And for that reason, the way that our airdrop math is working out, if you're able to combine those scores, your airdrop will be much larger than if you have two separate accounts, kind of a way to incentivize people who are actually engaging and not incentivize people who may be rewards farming on the platform. So just again, if you haven't yet done that, we actually haven't technically done the poll. So go ahead and do that if you can. But anyway, we're going to do one last poll this weekend to see if the spread's looking better. And we will keep you posted on the future airdrop stuff. We definitely understand how important it is to reward the community for your hard work, and really appreciate you kind of bearing with us as we figure this all out. Again, we're in BetaNet, we're testing things out. You guys are all super early. So We appreciate it. Anyway, have a good weekend, everyone. See you next week. And thank you so much for joining us today. Take care.